Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The forgotten and fearless daughter-in-law of Henry VIII, Mary Howard. During the reign of Henry VIII, we associate the notorious King of England with his desire greatly for a son, which led to divorce and death, but also with the brutal nature that he controlled England. What is less well known about Henry is that before Edward VI was born, he did father a child through an affair with his mistress, Elizabeth Blount. Henry Fitzroy, the king's illegitimate son, was showered with titles and royal ceremony, and some even consider that Henry VIII was planning for his illegitimate son to become his successor one day. To further strengthen his claim to the throne, the king sought to find a suitable wife with noble connections for him, and at the age of 14, Henry Fitzroy married Lady Mary Howard, the daughter of Thomas Howard, the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, one of the king's favourites. But who was Mary Howard, and what happened to her after the tragic death of her husband? Mary was born around the year 1519, and was the daughter of Thomas Howard, who at the time was the Earl of Surrey, who would later become the Duke of Norfolk, and Thomas is seen as a key player in Tudor politics. He was the uncle of 2 queens of England and 2 of Henry's wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Both of them were beheaded inside the walls of the Tower of London. However, he remained close within the king's royal circle, until he fell from favour in 1546, a year before Henry VIII died, and was even imprisoned in the Tower of London to await his execution. Mary's mother was Elizabeth Strafford, who herself was the daughter of Edward Strafford, the 3rd Duke of Buckingham, who was executed in 1521 on Tower Hill, and he himself had Plantagenet blood, making him a threat to Henry VIII. This means that Mary Lady Howard was a very well connected member of the nobility, and possibly could have had royal blood through her mother's side, having both Norfolk and Buckingham blood. The young girl received a very good education, as she was a member of nobility, and she was noted to have been very intelligent and also beautiful. Her father would have had high hopes for Mary, that she would marry a prominent prince, possibly in Europe, or even domestically, and that through Mary's marriage the family would be rewarded with titles, land, and even alliances. This would happen, as when Mary was just 10 years old, in December of 1529, the king would ask her father to accept a marriage between the young Mary and Henry VIII's illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy. Thomas Howard, of course, accepted the king's proposal for his daughter, and a royal marriage arrangement was made between the king's advisors and the Howard family. Henry Fitzroy, as mentioned, was the king's illegitimate son. However, he was greatly celebrated by the king and was given the title the Duke of Richmond and Somerset. Becoming a duke was a huge honour, and was the highest rank of the peerage, and for Henry VIII to place his illegitimate son in this position showed that he had huge plans for him. He even became the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, and there was even plans drawn up to crown him the King of Ireland. Following the king's annulment to his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, there had been suggestions that Fitzroy should even marry his own half-sister Mary, later Mary I, to strengthen his claim to the throne, and the Pope was even willing to grant allowances for this marriage. However, it's believed that the real driving force between the marriage of Mary Howard and Henry Fitzroy was Anne Boleyn, who was related to Mary. Elizabeth Stafford, Mary's mother, was against the marriage, and she made it known that she was not happy, and for this she was banned from court. There was no dowry expected for the marriage, which was unusual, and it's possible that Anne Boleyn was involved in this. The match was considered a triumph for the Boleyns, as Mary was a former member of Anne's household, and with no legitimate heir to the throne at the time, with Fitzroy seen as a future possible King of England, it would have cemented Mary Howard as the Queen Consort. Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII travelled to Calais in October of 1532, and they took Henry Fitzroy and Mary Howard with them. Whilst away, Anne Boleyn and Henry were married, and Mary became one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. In November of 1533, negotiations between the Howards and the Crown had been finalised, and with the two children being around the age of 14, they were married at Hampton Court Palace in a lavish ceremony. The couple were not allowed to live together and went back to their homes, as the king believed that his brother Arthur's death may have been brought on by relations at too young an age. However, the marriage would be a feeble and rather pointless one, as despite Fitzroy having a promising start to life inside of Tudor England, within a few years he became sick and tired. It was reported that he became ill with consumption or tuberculosis and died at St James's Palace on the 23rd of July 1536. This left Mary Howard a widow at around the age of 16 or 17. Their marriage had never been consummated, so Henry VIII stopped his widowed daughter-in-law from inheriting the estates of the Duke of Richmond and Somerset, and Mary could not remarry until things had been settled. Mary was then forced to live off handouts from her father, and to sell her jewels to have money. Mary then began to be disappointed with Henry's attitude towards her, as she was just cast aside and even contemplated confronting the king himself. She wrote to Thomas Cromwell for help on the matter, and Cromwell consulted the Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, and Cranmer stated that the marriage was valid despite never being consummated. This meant that Mary had the backing of the Archbishop against the king, to claim the titles and land she believed she was deserving of. This took years to be sorted, and following the dissolution of the monasteries, she did receive some land, property and wealth. Mary was a key player in politics with regards to her family, and she helped Margaret Douglas conceal her love affair with her uncle, Lord Thomas Howard, not to be confused with her father. Mary was a lookout for the two when the lovers wished for some alone time, but when the king found out about the affair, he was furious and discovered that the couple had a pre-contract to marry. Both Thomas and Margaret were sent to the Tower, but Mary denied any knowledge of a pre-contract. At the time, there were more matches for Mary Howard being considered. For example, Thomas Seymour. But Mary was very much against this. She saw this as her father simply marrying her off for more ties for the family, and her brother even opposed the marriage. As time went on, Mary remained with her household, and as the king made his way through marriages, when Anne of Cleves, Henry's fourth wife, came to England, Mary was dispatched to go and meet her at Calais. But when the king married his fifth wife, Catherine Howard, the Howard family dreamed of their ties to the royalty being concreted for decades to come. The young queen married the much older Henry VIII, but shortly after she had liaisons and affairs which were discovered, resulting in Henry's fifth wife being sent to the Tower of London and being beheaded. After Catherine's fall from grace, the Howards, including Mary, were arrested and imprisoned for a short period inside the Tower of London themselves. Mary's father again petitioned for her to marry Thomas Seymour, and the king gave his approval. But yet again, Mary voiced her refusal. However, she became embroiled in a plot against Henry VIII, when her brother, Henry, the Earl of Surrey, stated that Mary should seduce the king, her father-in-law, and become his mistress. But Mary refused, saying she would rather cut her own throat than consent to such villainy. She refused to speak to her brother, and he was later executed for treason, with Mary's testimony proving key against him. Her father was also charged with treason and was sentenced to death, but only her brother was executed, as 11 days after his death, King Henry VIII would be dead. Mary raised her brother's children after his execution, and was granted money by Edward VI for doing this, and he deemed her education to have been of a high standard. After Henry's death, Mary never really had prominence at court, again despite being such a high-profile player, and it's believed that she died in later 1557 during the reign of her half-sister-in-law, Mary I. Her life was one which was incredibly interesting, and saw her become the wife of a young man who was considered at the time, to become the successor of Henry VIII. If history would have been different, Mary Howard could have been the Queen Consort of England. She remained a fearless lady during her life, who was not afraid to voice her discontent and to stand up for what she believed was right. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.